All right. All right. So welcome everybody. We're going to let people roll in, watch our participants climb and climb and climb. So we have Dave Rendall here with us today. So thanks for being with us today, brother.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Should be a lot of fun. As we're kind of getting some people into the group, and I'll recap this at the end, we're going to test something out with Dave today that we haven't done in the past. Usually we ask you to put your Q&A or questions in the QA box. But what I'd love for you to do today is to click the participants button at the bottom of the screen. And if you have a question, just raise your hand. And what I'll do is go over there and actually allow you to talk. So I think a little additional interaction. Dave's been cooped up in his house for a couple of weeks in North Carolina, and he's ready to talk to some people. So we'll get some other voices flying around. Again, just the participants button at the bottom of the page. If you have a question or you want to say something to Dave, raise your hand, and then I'll click on you, unmute you, and allow you to kind of ask Dave directly any questions. Some other kind of information. We'll do a recap after this. Everybody who is in attendance will receive a recorded video of this presentation, as well as a full text recap, and any other additional materials will be added in there as well. So you receive that in an email, and there will be a post on the petracoach.com website with all that as well. Throughout this, and I mentioned to Dave earlier, so for the last 2 days, I've been fielding huge amounts of questions about the CARES Act, the SBA emergency loans, furloughs. Do I still count if I'm $100,000, and does my payroll taxes included in that? Those are not the kind of questions we want to throw at Dave Rendall today. So keep those for the side. We are putting together two mini workshops, one around short-term planning, and we'll get some additional information about that, and one around what is the CARES Act and the pieces of that, and how can you be better prepared for it. So that'll kind of be in your inbox, and you're welcome to send an email to info@petracoach.com if you have some interest in learning more about how to participate in those workshops and deep dive into those particular subjects. But our subject today is Dave Rendall, also known as the Pink Freak. He's spoken to audience on every inhabited continent. He's going all around the world. His clients range from the U.S. Air Force to the Australian government to Fortune 50 companies. And in between presentation, David competes in ultra marathons and Ironman triathlons, as you can see by his physique. He'll stand up and show you that, I'm sure. He's also written 4 books. I got a copy of one here, The Freak Factor. That's like old Dave, new Dave. Pink Goldfish. Let's see, the 4 factors of effective leadership, which we're going to dive into today. And then he has a really good book for kids around Freak Factor for kids, which I thought was a really kind of cool read for kids. So we're going to talk about unconventional leadership in times of crisis and what leaders need to focus on to get themselves, their teams, and their businesses to the other side of tough times. So with that, Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to manage the screen in front of me and ask any questions as they pop up. So Dave, thank you.
All right, awesome. So Andy set that up perfectly, because he said he's not going to take questions about furloughs and laying people off or getting loans. And those are actually 2 of the most common issues that people have during times like this. And so I want you to, I don't want you to answer, but I want you to think about your answers to 2 questions. Number 1, is high unemployment good or bad, right? Is high unemployment good or bad? Before this happened, we had really, really low unemployment. We already had 3.5 million unemployment claims last week. Is high unemployment good or bad? And the next question I want to ask you is, how much money do you have in savings, right? How much money do you have in savings, whether as a business or as a person or both? How much money do you have in savings? And I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this. So I actually developed this presentation when I was stranded in the Middle East. I was doing presentations for EO, and I was supposed to do 2 of them in Pakistan, and one of them got canceled, and I had a few days to kill. And so I stayed with my friend there in Pakistan. And then I went to Bahrain a little early because I had a client there. And I said, hey, why don't we, kind of like I'm doing with Petra Coach here, I said, hey, I got a couple days. Why don't we fire up a presentation? And so they put together a workshop real fast, made it public for their clients, because in Bahrain at the time, it was 2016. And just like it's happening right now, oil prices had just plummeted. And when oil prices went so low, the government's income basically went to almost zero. And so all of the public programs, which is most of what runs Bahrain, had disappeared. Companies were struggling. People were struggling. They were going through a mini crisis of their own there in the Middle East, kind of like you see right now with gas prices plummeting and oil prices plummeting. And so my normal presentations weren't going to work, and they asked me to come up with something different for them, and I developed this presentation. So that's kind of the context. And now we're dealing with something way even bigger than that, but these same principles still apply, and I've kind of adapted them. And so let's start with a little history lesson. In 2007, before the global financial crisis, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was at 14,164. Then the global financial crisis hit, and by 2009, the lowest point it reached was 6,507, less than half of where it had been just 2 years before. People were talking about the Great Recession. They were talking about potentially moving into an era of depression, and things looked really bleak, right? And what do we do when things look really bleak? Well, Andy just talked about them. We lay people off, we cut costs, we cut programs, we try to reduce anything we can possibly reduce. That usually involves doing less for the customers that we have. We try to find ways to save money. Those are the two things we do, right? We lose people, we cut people, and we cut costs, and we try to find ways to save money. And why do we do that? Well, that's what everybody does, and it seems like the most obvious thing to do. The reason my hair's so short is because my business just disappeared within a couple of days early in March. I was going to have a month that was equivalent to usually 2 or 3 of my regular months in March. I had almost 10 presentations lined up all over the world, and they all got canceled, every single one of them. I didn't get the fees that I was supposed to get. I had contracts. Those contracts weren't fulfilled. There's absolutely nothing I could do about that. And so the reason my haircut is what my haircut is because I took my beard trimmer and I cut my own hair, because we're cutting costs here at the Rendall house. This is for real, right? This is for real. We stopped going out to eat before all the restaurants closed. We're cutting costs because the income evaporated, and where do we go from here, right? So this is what people do. And that's why I asked that question before about high unemployment and how much money you have in savings. But I want us to keep going on the history lesson here, because things didn't stay there in 2009. By 2013, we were back to where we started, right? So between 2007 and 2013, we managed to basically stay even. If you would have left your investments where they were, if you would have kept your money in the stock market, you would have been back to where you started. And if you would have invested at 65, if you would have bought at 65, if you would have doubled down at 6,500, you would have made a lot of money. That's not what most people did. Most people pulled money out. Most people were panicking, putting money in cash, putting money in other instruments, and they missed out on it going back up. But it didn't just go up. By 2016, it was up to 18,000, almost 3 times as high as it had been at its low in 2009. And by 2019, we had a peak of 29,568, right? 29,568. And let's just go back there for a second, right? In 2009, we're at 6,500. By 2019, we're at 29,568. And here's why those 2 questions I asked you earlier were important. Is high unemployment good or bad, right? Well, it depends on who you talk to. If you're unemployed, high unemployment is bad. But if you're an employer, high unemployment is good, because what does it mean? It means good people are out there looking for jobs, and you can find more people, better talent than you can find in times of really low unemployment. In times of really low unemployment, you are restricted in who you can find. You are restricted in who's available. Good people have jobs. Good people have good jobs, and it's really hard to pull them away from those jobs. But in times of high unemployment, especially when it's because of a financial crisis and those people aren't unemployed because of their own failings, Good people are on the street looking for jobs. The problem is we're not hiring them because we're laying off or furloughing our people. So let's go back to the original question. What would you have done in 2009 when the Dow, and I know the Dow isn't the only measure, but we have to pick something, right? What would you have done in 2009 if you knew that in the next 10 years it was going to go from 65 to 29, right? And think about the cost of capital at that time. Think about what the government's doing right now, right? We're almost to the point of potentially negative interest rates. Money is almost being given away. What kind of investments would you have made, not in the stock market, in your people, in your business in 2009, if you knew how well it was going to go between 2009 and 2019, right? And so this is part of why I call this unconventional leadership, because I want to challenge us. We normally do what people normally do when times like this come around. We cut people and we cut costs. We oftentimes reduce services to our customers. And one of the things I want to challenge you to think about is, isn't this the perfect time to be looking for good people? Isn't this the perfect time to be bringing people on? And you might say, I don't have the money for that. Well, talk to Andy about how to do it. You can borrow the money for that. We borrow money all the time. We make investments all the time when we know that it's a good decision. And part of the reason I told you this story is because what do we know? I've been alive long enough to go through the stock market crash of 87, the dot-com bubble in the late 90s, early 2000s, 9/11, the global financial crisis, and here we are again. And that's why I gave you those numbers. It goes down, it comes back up. Things go poorly, then they go well again. We can't always predict when, we can't always predict how poorly, but things go poorly, then they go well again, then they go poorly, then they go well again. And what separates the people who really succeed in these times is the kinds of decisions they make when things go bad, and whether they follow what everybody else does or they do things differently. Times of high unemployment means that there's a lot of people out there who, through no fault of their own, are unemployed. You can bring those people on your team now. You give them a job when no one else will, when everyone else is laying people off. And it applies to the people you have now. Costco, during the last global financial crisis, gave their people a $2 an hour raise. They didn't lay them off because they said our people, not only can they not live if we lay them off, they can't live on a pay cut either. Costco doubled down. They invested in their employees. That's another thing we cut during difficult times. We cut training. We cut things like what Andy does. We cut coaching. We cut planning. We start hunkering down and thinking about now. What do you think happens to your loyalty with your people if you were to invest in them when everyone else is divesting those employees, right? What if you put more into your people? This is a perfect time for training. For a lot of us, the business level has decreased. What a perfect time to train your people. What a perfect time to develop your people. What a perfect time. I mean, betterbookclub.com, pay your people to read books while they're at home. They can't do as much. Maybe there isn't as much to do. What if you treated this as university time? And again, that's not what anybody does, but what if you did? What if you invested in new and better people? What if you made your people better? What if you paid your people more? And then you say, again, I don't have the money for that. We all have money for things that matter. And again, what happens during times of crisis is that money becomes cheaper oftentimes than it is normally. You can actually afford to make those investments if you believe that things are going to turn around, and they always do. So one of the things I do is I read a ton of books. I actually listen to a ton of books on audio. And a few years ago, I was listening to the book about Elon Musk. And by no means am I saying he's perfect, but there's a lot of lessons we can learn from Elon Musk. And I'm going to walk through some things for those of you who don't really know his story, and we don't necessarily just from watching the news and things like that. I'm going to walk through some things about Elon Musk, and then I'm going to go through kind of a framework to talk to you about how we can learn from this and also apply some other lessons. So Elon Musk started at a company called Zip2. They were like an early like mapping company. And he did very well there, and he ended up selling that, and he made personally $22 million. Now, he did something that most people don't do. Instead of just trying to get other people's money, he invested his own money, and we'll get to that later, into a company that ended up being combined with some other companies and became PayPal. And he was able to sell that and make $165 million for himself personally. And then he took all of that money and he reinvested into a company that a couple of you may have heard of called Tesla. And in 2016, they came out with the Model 3, and they sold pre-sold 325,000 of those cars and made $325 million basically in a week, right? We'll get to pre-selling in a little while. That's not a normal thing to do either. But that's a little bit of Elon Musk's story. But Elon Musk doesn't just run Tesla. He also is involved with Solar City through his brother. He's also had a lot of success, especially even since I originally did this presentation with SpaceX. And he's been able to reuse rockets and land them back on Earth after sending them up to space, and has made some amazing strides in that. And altogether, his companies are worth, and that number may have changed since then, but $13 billion, right? So he's doing okay, right? He's doing okay. He's probably hanging in there right now during this recent crisis. And if things get too bad on Earth, he's ready to go to Mars, right? So that's Elon Musk. What can we learn from Elon Musk? The first one is to be alert, right? To be alert. Elon Musk, for those people who don't know, doesn't really actually run Tesla in order to sell electric cars. He runs Tesla in order to make the money that he needs to take us to Mars, right? Elon Musk believes that we need to be ready to be interplanetary, right? He's so concerned about climate change and what's going on our Earth that he thinks we need to be prepared to go somewhere else. Now, whether you think he's right or wrong about that, I'll be honest with you, I think he's an idiot as it relates to this. How bad would the Earth have to be for Mars to be a good alternative, right? And couldn't we take any of the technology that we're planning on taking to Mars to make it inhabitable and use it to make Earth inhabitable? But let's not worry about that. The point is that he's not complacent, right? He's not complacent. He's so concerned about, he feels such a sense of urgency about climate change that he's looking at extreme solutions. He's not sitting around going, it's going to be okay, it's going to be fine. And this is an important lesson, because when things are going well, from 2009 to 2019, when the stock market goes from 6,500 to 29.5, when it goes up by 23,000 points, what do most of us do? We go, nice. Life is good, and it's just going to keep getting better. Meanwhile, Elon Musk is like, we're all going to die and we better go to Mars, right? And that's one of the things that effective leaders have to do. They have to challenge people and push people out of their complacency, right? Now, again, he believes in aliens, and we don't need to get into that. I'm not here to say he's the perfect example of everything, but one of the things Elon Musk is he's very alert. He's not complacent. He feels a sense of urgency. And one of the things that we know when we study change, right? There's a great book by a guy named John Kotter called Leading Change. And the thing he says is that the number one reason companies don't change is because of a lack of urgency, right? A lack of urgency. We get complacent. We think things are going to be fine. And this applies to me. I am not preaching to you about something that I'm perfect at. I should have had more money in savings, right? And I should have had my company diversified to include more virtual options like coaching and online training and online courses. Andy and I are actually working on a project related to an assessment that would have filled in that, but I didn't start that soon enough. I had a general sense of I need to invest in this for the future, and I was taking small steps, but I didn't feel that urgency. I didn't feel that panic. I wasn't ready to go to Mars, right? Like Elon Musk was. So step one is we have to be alert, right? We have to be alert. We have to be thinking about what's going to happen in the future. And what would you do if you knew that you could predict the future? What are the two things that you'd want to know? Right? What are the two things you'd want to know? And the most common answers to that are, I want to know the lottery numbers. Right? I want to know the lottery numbers, and I want to know what's going to happen in the stock market. Right? I want to know the lottery numbers and I want to know the stock market, but I'm going to show you how we actually can predict the future, right? We actually can predict the future, and we can do it in ways that are really meaningful for our companies. Winston Churchill said that the farther backward we can look, the farther forward we're likely to see, right? The farther backward we can look, the farther forward we're likely to see. In other words, when we look to the past, we learn from the past, we study the past, we can see patterns, and those patterns show us what's going to happen in the future. I already did it a little bit earlier. 14,000 goes to 6,000, goes to 14,000, goes to 29,000, right? We see that over and over and over and over again. The stock market hasn't been on a steady climb since it was invented. It's been a series of peaks and valleys, but they've gone up consistently over time. Things get bad and then they come back, and people respond in predictable ways when things go bad, and people respond in predictable ways when things come back, and they're usually not the right ways, they're the predictable ways. And so we can be alert. One of the things we need to do to be alert is we don't need to just be thinking about the future. We need to be actually predicting that future by looking back and understanding the past. And I'll give you a simple example of how this can work. Long distance communication was revolutionized with telegraph. We could finally communicate over long distances around the world, over mountains, under oceans. You could send messages around the world with telegraph, and we had to have these wires, and they had to be all over the world. But then somebody said, wait a second, I wonder if we could do it wirelessly, right? I wonder if we could do it wirelessly. And everybody said, you're crazy. But a guy named Marconi was able to do it. And then we were able to send these signals wirelessly, but all we could send was dots and dashes. And then somebody said, wait a second, what if we could transmit voices? And now we had bigger lines on bigger towers, and they went over the mountains and under the oceans and all around the world. And now we could speak to each other long distance over telephone lines. And then somebody said, what if we could do it wirelessly? And everybody said they were crazy. And the first one weighed 300 pounds and had to be installed in your car. But then we got the internet. And now we're talking about fatter cables, and now we can send videos, and now we can send pictures, and now we can send emails, and now we need broadband, and now we need fiber optic. Now we need really big cables to go over the mountains and under the oceans. And then somebody said, wait a second, I wonder if we could do it wirelessly. Now, if we stop right here, what's the pattern? Everything goes from wired to wireless, right? Everything goes from wired to wireless. And if you're back there with telegraph and you see it go wireless, and then you see telephone, you could have predicted it's probably going to go wireless. But then definitely once you've seen the pattern repeat twice and you've seen, then you see broadband, you could be one of the people who says, wait a second, we should be looking at how do we do this wirelessly? This is definitely what's going to happen next. So I saw this happening years ago. And to be clear, I don't know anything about how science works. It's still magic to me that my lights turn on when I flip the switch. People have explained it to me. It doesn't make any sense to me. I am not a scientist. I don't understand anything about that kind of stuff. But I predicted 10 years ago, when I started thinking about this process of predicting the future, I predicted wireless electricity. And I told my wife, I said, look, wireless electricity is coming. And my wife was like, you're an idiot. They already have wireless electricity. It's called lightning, right? My wife thought I was the biggest dummy ever. And she's like, it's called batteries. She's like, wireless electricity is not coming. You have no idea what you're talking about. And 2 months later, Fast Company put out their magazine, and on the cover it said wireless electricity. And I held that up and I said, look, I know what I'm talking about, right? We have all these things plugged in, and now we have wireless electricity, right? We have wireless electricity. And so that doesn't seem like as big of a deal, but I've done this process. I've tried to teach people this process. And when I would tell people 5, 6, 7 years ago, wireless electricity was the next big thing, people would literally tell me I was stupid. People would roll their eyes, and people couldn't even bring themselves to say it. I'd walk them all the way up to it and go, so we have everything plugged in. We have wired electricity. What's next? And people would just go, I don't know what's next, right? It was voodoo. It's right there, but it's impossible to see because we haven't seen it yet, right? The farther backward we can look, the farther forward we're likely to see. And what unconventional leaders do is they're looking for those patterns. They're paying attention, and instead of looking right now and going, things are good and they'll stay good forever, they say things are never good forever. And I need to understand what's happening now, what's been happening in the past so I can predict the future. Great leaders are alert. Wireless electricity has gone so far that buses in South Korea run on the electricity that's actually below the streets. There's wireless electricity being fed to the buses from below the streets on a consistent basis. And then this answers a question that people have about electric cars. They say electric cars are never going to work because they have range problems. Well, what if we electrify our streets, or we can transmit the electricity wirelessly through our streets to the vehicles? Then you never have to stop. You never have to charge it because it can be done wirelessly, right? We can start to predict the future. And even that, sometimes even saying that, some of you are like, I don't know if that would ever work. It's already happening. And that's one of the things that we're so bad at sometimes. Sometimes things are already happening. I was predicting wireless electricity, and then I researched it online. It was already there. There was already a TED talk about it. And even when the guy did the TED talk, people couldn't believe what was happening. They didn't think it was real. They didn't think it would work, right? We need to be alert. The farther backwards we can look, the farther forward we're likely to see. And sometimes one of the things we can see is patterns where things come around. In 2016, sales of bikes in Europe were up by 40%. Bikes were outselling cars for two reasons. Economic reasons, it was expensive to drive vehicles, but also climate change reasons, environmental reasons. People wanted better alternatives to cars, right? So one of the things we learned when we look back is that things oftentimes repeat themselves. We tend to think cars replaced bicycles, right? Cars replaced horses, right? But things don't always replace those other things. Those things still have purposes. Those things still have meaning. They still have value. And oftentimes things come back around to the way they used to be because the new thing wasn't as good as everybody expected it to be. And again, you can see that pattern over and over again. Again, in 2016, sales of vinyl records were up 17%. People were building new factories to make vinyl records. A lot of new artists, when you can stream people's music immediately through Spotify, through iTunes, people are putting out vinyl records. They're putting out the huge album covers the way they used to because there's something tangible. There's something interesting. There's something special about that sound, the scratch, the depth to it that people can't let go of. It's very old, and yet it's valued in a way that we wouldn't think because things don't always move forward. Sometimes they move around, and you can see that process, right? So sometimes you're caught thinking, okay, everything's going this way, right? Everything's going this way. But things don't always keep going the same direction. Sometimes they come back around, and if we look backwards, we can see that. If we look around, we can see that. One of my favorite examples of this is high tech, high touch. It's this idea by John Nesbitt, who wrote a book called Megatrends, and high tech, high touch was one of the megatrends. And then it was such a good one that he wrote an entire book about it. But basically, it's really simple. What it says is that the more technologically advanced our society gets, the more people value personal connections and human contact and the human touch. Right? So one of the things we do is we go, oh, our society's inevitably be moving on this technological ride. We're going constantly, there's this trend towards more and more and more technology. We're losing our human touch. We're losing our ability to connect as humans. And pretty soon, everyone's just going to sit alone in their houses on their computers. And that's absolutely not true. The more technology takes over our world, the more we value human contact, human touch, and human connection. And so your business, knowing this trend, can actually look at that and go, everyone's going to, Andy will tell you this, people love a handwritten note. Yeah, you can send them an email. Yeah, you can send them a text. But Andy's over here with a feather quill and an ink well, and he's got some parchment paper, and he's getting it done, right? And when you get a card in the mail from Andy, handwritten from Andy, you know he put some time and attention, and he put some effort into that, and he can only be working on one of those at a time. This isn't his company newsletter that can be sent out to 500 email addresses simultaneously. That's not what this is. This is a handwritten note. This is real life. This is high touch in a world of high tech, and we value that. It didn't go out of style. It's more valuable because of all the technology that we see in our world. So the first one is be alert. Don't be complacent, be alert. The next one is to be brave, right? Be brave. Elon Musk didn't put all his money into stocks and bonds. Elon Musk didn't invest in an annuity when he sold Zip2. He took all the money and he put it in PayPal. And when he sold PayPal, he didn't take all the money and put it in safe investments and go live on an island somewhere that he could probably buy for himself. He took all of the money and he invested in a Tesla. And then even a few times along the way, he's taken all the money that he had in Tesla and reinvested it in Tesla, bought Tesla stock when other people doubted it. He put his own money into it to prove that he believed it 100%. Elon Musk has demonstrated over and over and over a tremendous amount of courage as it relates to his businesses, and people have followed him because he's literally put his money where his mouth is, and people believe in something like that. One of the big things that we're seeing right now is a push towards hand washing. And Andy and I both travel all the time. And if you've ever been at least in the men's bathroom at an airport, you know that 47% of men don't even bother to wash their hands. Another 22% of them put their hands under the water and then just shake their hands out and wipe them on their pants on the way out. These people are savages, right? And so what we're learning now is that it's important to wash your hands, but we actually didn't used to know that it was important to wash your hands. There was a guy named Ignaz Semmelweis, and he was a Hungarian physician in the 1800s. He promoted hand washing in hospital operating rooms, which reduced the mortality rate from 35% to 1%, right? He was the first person who said, maybe we shouldn't be working in dead bodies in one room and then go help a woman have her baby in the other room. I think that's a bad idea. We should wash our hands in between those things. Nobody would listen to him. So then he did an experiment. He reduced mortality from 35% to 1%. And then everybody said, you're crazy. You're ridiculous. That's stupid. And he died in an insane asylum and nobody washed their hands, right? It took years and years and years and years before anybody would listen to what he had to say. In fact, nobody listened to what he had to say during his lifetime. What they said about him at the time is he conflicted with the established scientific and medical opinions of the time, and his ideas were rejected by the medical community, right? Think about the criticisms that Elon Musk gets. I even criticized him in here. When you're alert, when you're not complacent, when you feel a sense of urgency, when you're trying to predict and invent the future, you're going to be unpopular. Even when you're right, even when it works, you're going to be unpopular. He conflicted with the established scientific and medical opinions of the time, and his ideas were rejected by the medical community. Go to your bank and tell them you want to borrow money to hire people right now, even though the income for your business has been dramatically reduced over the last 3 months. And you can't predict when it's going to come back. And tell them you're doubling down and making a huge investment in getting the best people, and you're going to have somebody staring at you like you're the biggest moron that they've ever met in their entire life, because nobody does that. Well, not nobody does that. Very few people do that. It's a good idea, but it's hard to execute because it's not normal, right? That's why this is called unconventional leadership. And the reason we have to be brave is because when you do things in an unconventional fashion, you're going to get pushback, you're going to get resistance, right? I love this quote from Robert Quinn. It's one of the guiding quotes in my life. He says, deviance will always generate external pressures to conform. If you perform beyond the norms, the systems will adjust and try to make you normal, right? Deviance will always generate external pressures to conform. If you perform beyond the norms, the systems will adjust and try to make you normal, right? And you might think, not when it's good deviance, not when it's the right kind of deviance. No, always. I did a talk one time. I'm 6'6". Like Andy said, I'm a tall guy. I'm 6'6", 6'9" in heels. And I was doing a presentation one time in Australia, and they introduced me to this woman who was organizing the event. And she took one look at me and she said, "You're too tall." What do you say to that, right? What do you say? I'm sorry. It's one of my goals for 2020 to reduce my height. I apologize for being a giant. What she was saying is, you're so big, it makes me feel small. You're so big, it makes me feel uncomfortable. I'd feel better if you weren't weird, right? I'd feel better if you weren't weird. Deviance always generates external pressures to conform. Most people even think of tall as being good, but in her mind, it was too much. Deviance will always generate external pressures to conform. If you perform beyond the norms, the systems adjust and try to make you normal. And this is why you have to be brave. You have to be alert to see it, to know what the opportunities are, to understand the past so you can predict the future. But when you try to act on that, you're going to get some pushback. You're going to get some resistance. Gandhi's a great example of this. When I've asked people over the years, who's the greatest leader in the history of the world, Gandhi's name comes up over and over and over and over again. But does anybody remember how his life ended? He was assassinated. He was killed. He was loved by so many people, but he was also hated by other people. The things he did that made some people love him and identify him even almost 80 years later as one of the greatest leaders in the history of the world caused other people to hate him and want to end his life. Because he was brave, he encountered resistance and ultimately paid with his life. If we want to be successful, we have to be different. But if we're going to be different, we have to be brave, because we're going to experience resistance. Albert Einstein said, great spirits have always experienced violent opposition from mediocre minds, right? Great spirits have always experienced violent opposition from mediocre minds. When you try to do something unusual, when you try to do something wonderful, when you try to do something amazing, when you try to do something valuable, when you try to do something meaningful, the majority of people are going to resist that. And some people are going to be so upset that their opposition is going to become violent, right? Great spirits have always experienced violent opposition from mediocre minds. So this is why we have to be brave. If you look at this chart right here, when I first wrote my book, The 4 Factors of Effective Leadership, I would start each talk by asking people who were the greatest leaders in the history of the world. And Gandhi always made the list, and Jesus always made the list, and Martin Luther King Jr. always made the list, and Abraham Lincoln always made the list. And one time I realized we killed every single one of those people. Right? The people that kept ending up on the list of the greatest leaders in the history of the world all got killed. And so I started thinking about, what do we learn about leadership from that? And what we learn is this chart that you're seeing right here. As our influence increases, our potential suffering is going to increase. And if we're not willing, if we're not brave enough to risk potential suffering, then we're not going to have influence in our businesses, with our people, and in our lives. What we learn from looking at the past and looking at great leaders is that suffering is inextricably tied to leadership and to influence. We have to be brave. There's no such thing. This chart doesn't work. There's no such thing as a chart where our influence increases while our sacrifice stays low. There's no way to minimize sacrifice, minimize suffering, right? One of the things Andy's doing during this time is that they're continuing to provide coaching on scholarship for some of their businesses who've been overwhelmed by this crisis and can't afford to keep going. And what Andy said is, this is so important. We're going to keep doing this for you, even though you can't pay right now, right? We're going to suffer financially in order to help you to succeed in your business, right? What kind of relationship do you think it gives him with those people? What kind of response do you think he's going to get from those people, right? When somebody's willing to sacrifice for me, when someone's willing to suffer for me, that's real relationship, right? That's real connection. That's transformation. That's not transaction, right? So one of the things I think we have to remember is that great leaders endure suffering. It's terrible leaders who inflict suffering, right? I cut my costs. I've cut my own hair. I gave you that example to tell you how serious I was, but I haven't laid off my virtual assistant in the Philippines because I pay half of her salary. A fellow speaker of mine pays the other half of her salary. And if I cut her, she will be unable to feed her family. She's literally locked in her house in the Philippines. It's basically martial law over there right now. And if I cut her salary, if I stop sending her payments, because I can't afford it, then she can't feed her family, and she's going to experience economic devastation, right? So I can decide if I prioritize myself in this situation, or if I see the potential for others, hey, it's going to hurt me to pay that when my income just went to zero, but I'm not going to inflict that kind of suffering on her, right? Because that's not what great leaders do, right? So that's the challenge. Can we be brave in these times? What am I willing to sacrifice in order to increase my influence? We have to be alert. We have to be brave. The next one is we have to be different, right? We have to be different. Tesla is different. Tesla's different, not just a little different. Tesla's the complete opposite of every other car company. It's electric instead of gas powered. You prepay for the cars instead of them offering financing. It's self-driving. They're working on self-driving instead of a human driver. You get constant updates when you drive a Tesla instead of getting a 2018 model or a 2019 model, having sporadic changes and improvements. Solar City is the opposite. They offer free solar, or they offer free charging instead of very high cost refueling with a regular car. SpaceX does the opposite. They're a private instead of, we even just started deciding that NASA was too expensive. And then Elon Musk, like, I think I can do it even without public funds, right? So they did it privately instead of publicly. They reused the rockets instead of making them disposable, right? Now think about that, right? They're not just a little bit different. They're completely different. They're the complete opposite of what everybody else is doing. It's tremendously unconventional. And I want to give you another example that I really, really like. Remember 2007, the stock market was at 14,164. And then 2009, it went down to 6,507, right? That's a loss of 54%. If you're in index funds, you lost 54%, right? That was a loss of $10 trillion in 2 years, right? That was a loss of $10 trillion in 2 years. So, well, it's bad times, you lose money. That's just what happens. It's bad times, you lose money. That's just what happens. But that's not what happened to everybody. Michael Burry, who worked at Scion Capital and ran Scion Capital, saw this coming. He read all the forms that nobody else read. He asked questions that no one else would ask. You probably saw him a little bit in the movie The Big Short, although it wasn't just focused on him. And his fund that he ran went up 490% when the stock market went down 54%. He earned 490% gain for his investors when the stock market was losing 54%. He made $1 billion for himself and his investors when everybody else was losing $10 trillion. Now, to be clear, you have to be alert. He was paying attention to things no one else was paying attention to. He was studying things. He was getting answers to things. He even created some insurance instruments that didn't used to exist. He was alert. He was brave. His investors, while he ended up making them $1 billion and increasing the value by 490%, but while he was doing that, they were suing him to get their money back because they thought he was a lunatic, right? They were actively trying to get their money back from him right before, fortunately they didn't win, right before he made them 490% and $1 billion, right? He had to be alert, he had to be brave, but he had to be different. And here's what he said, and I absolutely love this. To succeed in a spectacular fashion, you have to be spectacularly unusual, right? Not just a little bit different, right? That's we're a little different. We provide a little bit better customer service. We care about our customers a little bit more. No, to succeed in a spectacular fashion, you have to be spectacularly unusual. And let's use an example of that, right? Another person who succeeded in this world in a spectacular fashion, at least financially, is Warren Buffett, right? The numbers go up and down, but he's been worth as much as $66 billion. He's given half of it away and then gotten back up to a whole other level. And here's one of the things he says: be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy when others are fearful. That's not just a little different. That's what? It's the opposite. Be fearful when others are greedy. And what does he mean? When the stock market's going from 2009 at 6,500 to 2019 at 29,500, be fearful. What does that mean to be fearful? It means be alert, right? Be alert. A dip's going to happen. A bubble's going to happen. A crash is going to happen. A problem's going to happen. Be a little... remember I asked you if you had money, how much money you had in savings? Put a little money in savings. Put a little more money in savings. Put a lot of money in savings. Pay off debt. Cut back a little bit. Watch your costs. Be a little bit conservative. And then be greedy when others are fearful. Then when everything falls apart, you're in a financial position that no one else is in. You have money to spend when no one else has money. You make investments in companies at pennies on the dollar when everybody else is pulling their money out. When everybody else panics, you move in. When everybody lays people off, you hire them. When everybody lays people off, you're training your people. When everybody lays people off, you're paying your people more because you've got the money in cash. You were waiting for a time like this, right? Be fearful when others are greedy. Be greedy when others are fearful. In other words, do the opposite. my message today isn't just that we should be suspicious of what everybody else is doing. We should be hesitant to do what everybody else is doing. I think most of the time we should assume what everybody else is doing is not what we should be doing. It's probably the wrong idea. It's probably incorrect. Everybody's laying people off. I'd encourage you to reconsider that. Everybody, right? As you come out of this, right? Think about paying off debt. Think about putting more money in savings. Think about investing in your people. Think about preparing for the next one. Don't get caught up in that complacency. Don't get caught up in that cycle. And it doesn't necessarily have to be considered greed, right? But there's that optimism, right? It seems positive. It's optimism, but we have to be careful that we don't get trapped in this process of just simply following what everybody else is doing and ending up with what everybody else is getting. And again, this is the follow-up to the deep change quote from before, Robert Quinn. Excellence is a form of deviance, right? You say, I want to have an excellent company. I just don't want to be too weird about it, right? I don't want to be a weirdo. I just want to be successful. Well, you don't get to pick, right? Excellence is a form of deviance. The way to achieve and maintain excellence is to deviate from the norm. You become excellent because you're doing things that normal people do not want to do. The way to achieve and maintain excellence is to deviate from the norm. You become excellent because you're doing things that normal people do not want to do. And notice that words matter. Not that normal people can't do, by doing things that normal people do not want to do. I don't want to have to try to stay up with all the trends. I don't want to have to study the past. I don't want to have to think about the future. I don't want to have to save money. I don't want to have to. That's fine. It's not things. Sometimes we think that success happens because somebody has something we don't have or something we don't have access to. It's doing things that normal people do not want to do. Jim Collins said, great companies are among the first to try the outlandish, the different, the radical. Does any of that describe your company? If you want to be spectacularly successful, you have to be spectacularly unusual. And how can you start doing that right now? Right? How can you start doing that right now? What can you do for your customers? Right? I was in Bahrain and they have something there called Batelco, and it was the national telephone service, but they had diversified and they'd started providing services in other countries, and they had allowed competition in for wireless and for things like that. And Batelco had to compete. And I told them, what if you made a play to be the Bahrain telecommunications company again? What if you gave special discounts to people in Bahrain? What if you gave people in Bahrain better customer service? What if you gave people in Bahrain priority? What if you made people in Bahrain feel special? What if you gave them better customer service during this financial crisis? What if you took care of them even when they couldn't pay? What if you helped them out when nobody else would? What would happen when you came out of this 2017, 2018, 2019? What would happen to the loyalty of your customers? What would happen if you hired all the best people while everyone else is laying people off? What if you built up the best staff? What if you invested in the training? They had a huge opportunity, but we have a real hard time doing that. What does everybody else in your industry do? How could you do the opposite? One of my TEDx talks last year was called Oppositioning, about how great companies and successful companies do the opposite of what everybody else is doing. And not just the opposite of bad things that people are doing, but just the opposite of what anybody is doing. It's a great question to ask. Even if the answer isn't easy or immediately obvious, asking what the opposite would look like is really, really a great question to ask. It helps us come up with innovative ideas. And I love this from Max Dupree, said, give people a license to be contrary, right? Give people license to be contrary. Even think about that right now. When somebody posts something on Facebook that you don't like right now, when somebody says, maybe I'm going to go out when other people say I should stay in, are you willing to listen to alternative voices? Are you willing to listen to other points of view? Are you willing to truly try to understand where people are coming from? Or is it easy just to double down on the status quo? So I love this chart here. We had influence and suffering, and the same thing is true with deviance. I think our influence and our success increases as our deviance increases. Martin Luther King said, a genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus. We're in an election year, and what do politicians do? They look at what the polls say, and then they try to tell you what they think you want to hear, right? And I think one of the things we have to do as leaders right now is not be looking for what we think people want to hear, but we need to help mold people's ideas of what should happen, mold people's ideas of how our company should go, mold people's ideas of what our society should look like in the future. We're not searchers for consensus. We're not followers of consensus. Real leadership is about molding consensus. And then the last one we're going to talk about today is be inspiring. We need to be alert, be brave, be different, and be inspiring. Elon Musk has got people excited about being astronauts again. Some of the best scientists in the world want to work for SpaceX. They want to work for Tesla because the mission of those companies is inspiring. We're going to build a new world on Mars. We are going to put rockets into space and bring them back. We are going to save the world with electric cars. That's exciting, right? That's exciting. We have to give people something to be excited about. This is an ad for Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expedition of 1914. He said, men wanted for hazardous journeys, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful. And that's exactly what happened. They did not return very safely. It took them a very long time. Honor and recognition in case of success, right? Here's the thing that we have to, here's how you inspire people right now. It's very simple. It's two pieces. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it, right? It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. And here's the problem. In times like this, here's what we tell people. It's not going to be easy. And then we just stop. Here's what I want you to do. Here's how I want you to do it. Here's what has to be done. We lose our focus on purpose. We lose our focus on direction. We talk about the suffering, be brave, but we don't talk about the purpose. We don't talk about the meaning. We don't talk about the value. He had a line so long, he got to pick from the best people that were out there because he told them up front, this isn't going to be easy, but this is going to be worth it. Our perseverance increases as our sense of purpose increases. What can you do during this time right now to focus on the big picture, to focus on the purpose, to focus on the value and the meaning of what your organization does? Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech is famous, but a line that never gets replayed is, we could go to jail together, right? We could go to jail together. Nobody wants that line, right? But he put it in there because what he's saying is, yeah, we can go to the mountaintop. Yeah, we can live together in brotherhood, but to get there, we're going to have to go to jail together. And you lose a lot of people at that point. Whoa, back it up, Martin. I want to go to the mountaintop. I don't want to go to jail. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. If we want people to persevere, if we want people to stick with us through tough times, we have to give them a sense of purpose. We have to be inspiring. I love this story of Dick and Rick Hoyt, right? Rick Hoyt was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. It gave him all sorts of physical disabilities. They thought he had mental disabilities when he was born as well. And the doctors actually told his parents to institutionalize him, but they didn't. And they raised him and they realized he had a tremendous amount of intelligence. He just didn't have a good way to communicate it. And so they got him adaptive equipment and things like that. And he's since gone on to college and become very successful in the work he does, but his body still doesn't work. And his dad pushed him in a local 5-mile race. And when they were done, he told his dad, I don't feel disabled when we run together, right? When we run in races, I don't feel disabled. So his dad pushed him in a 10K and his son said, how about a half marathon? He did a half marathon. His son said, how about a marathon? It's easy when you're the one in the chair to say, let's go for a marathon. So his dad does a marathon with him. They eventually do an Ironman. You see, they've done 65 marathons, but they've also done multiple Ironmans and even gone to the Ironman World Championship, right? And to do an Ironman, Dick has to pull him in a raft for 2.4 miles. And then he has to ride him with his son on the front of his bike, ruining all the aerodynamics for 112 miles. And then he pushes him for 26.2 miles on the chair and has to do it in the same time limit as everybody else. And I want you to think about something. If you ask Dick Hoyt, hey, isn't that difficult to do that with your son and for your son? Isn't it harder to pull and to push your son over the distance of an Ironman? What would he probably say, right? No, it's not harder. It's objectively harder. It's physically harder. But if you take my son out of the equation, it's not even worth doing. Right? I only persevere because there's a purpose. I only do races for my son because it's so meaningful for him. When you take away the purpose, you take away the perseverance. We can't tell people it's not going to be easy if we won't tell them that it's going to be worth it, because the only reason people do things that aren't easy is because it's going to be worth it. So we have to communicate that to people, and we have to recognize that dichotomy. People don't do hard things unless there's a good reason to do hard things. Malcolm Gladwell, in talking about the last financial crisis, said in times of crisis, we think we need bold and daring decisions from our leaders, but we don't. We need humility, right? Now let's stop for a second there. What does humility have to do with all this? Well, humility causes us to be alert. I'm not the smartest. I'm not perfect. I'm not infallible. I don't know everything. I have to stay alert, right? I have to stay alert. Humility allows us to be brave, right? To be brave, right? We have to be in this together. I need to take these chances. This is going to be difficult, but I think it's going to be worth it. In times of crisis, we think we need bold and daring decisions from our leaders, but we don't. We need humility. We need somebody who's willing to say, I might not be right. I'm not sure. This might not be perfect. This might not work. This could be wrong. Let's try something differently, right? If you have to be right, you don't try different things. If you have to be right, you can't take chances. You can't take risks. You can't push boundaries. If you're afraid of losing, if you're afraid of failing, you can't try things that are different, right? In times of crisis, we think that we need bold and daring decisions from our leaders, but we don't. We need humility, right? And so I'm going to leave you with this last quote from Mark Twain. I included this in my first leadership book. And I think this is the challenge we're all facing right now. He said, keep away from people who belittle your ambitions. Small people always do that. But the truly great make you feel that you too can become great. I think that's our challenge in these times. Do we believe that our people have the potential to become great? Do we think that our company has the potential to become great? Do we think that our society has the potential to become great? Are we leading people towards greatness, right? Or are we belittling people's ambitions? Are we feeling small? Are we acting small? Are we pushing people down, or are we lifting people up, right? So those are the challenges, right? 4 challenges. We need to be alert. We need to be brave. We need to be different. We need to be inspiring. That's how you lead unconventionally in challenging times.
Wow, Dave, that's a ton of information. Thanks for sharing that. Now take a drink. You're always energetic and your delivery is always spot on. So thanks for being here and with us today. Something that we've been doing and working on here is obviously we pivoted our business model. We used to do longer term planning, 3 years, 5 years, breaking it down to a year, and then working a quarter at a time. And we've had to go to much more concise, in some cases month by month or even week by week.
Yeah.
We've come up with this. We call it DSRO, which is defense, stabilize, reset, and then offense. And I think that's a good alignment with what you're talking about, because what we're noticing is most people are kind of getting stuck in this kind of defense stabilize area. They're just defending their turf and they're doing what they can to stabilize, but they're not focusing on what is the reset, and then certainly not focusing on what is the offensive game. And I've been telling people, we as humans don't have a tendency not to change until there's pain. You referenced it in the very beginning.
Yeah.
We're all feeling pain. Now we're making all of these changes, and we all know we should have done that already. We should have been much more prepared for an instance. And the concept is, what is the next pain? So what's the pain in 30 days, and how do I get ready for that? 60 days, 90 days, even now looking out. So I believe it's time for business owners to take this kind of information, obviously lead with the information, and change a mindset from, yes, we got to play some defense and we need to get stabilized. We have to go do that. Absolutely. And we got to get into, what does the reset model look like? And what does the offensive model look like? Whether that be offense next week, or whether that be offense in a month, or whether that be offense in a year. But all of those things are going to happen. And the more prepared you are for it, the better your outcome will be.
Yeah, I think that model is actually perfect for what I was just talking about, because basically part of what I'm trying to encourage people to do, this is part of the be alert, is we should be playing defense, a little bit of defense all the time, a little bit of stabilizing all the time, always looking for some experimental resets that we're going to test out to see if they could become our next big thing, so that when everything goes in the toilet for everybody, we go ahead and play offense because we were ready for it, right? We were ahead of the game. We had all the money in savings. We had that new project already ready to go. A friend of mine in one of the speaker groups I'm in, she's a productivity coach. She helps people be productive virtually from home. She helps people manage their attention at home. She teaches people how to connect with people using technology. Well, what do you think happened to her business when everything went in the toilet? Her business went crazy, went absolutely nuts. And so last year I made way more money than she did doing my keynotes and traveling around the world. And she was trying to build keynotes and do more traveling around the world. But she had this thing that she's been building consistently over the years. And then the world changed. in such a way that made her thing way more valuable than mine thing and made my thing almost worthless. The problem was she was learning from us and trying to do more keynotes. I wasn't doing enough to learn from her and build that side of my business, right? So yeah, I think that's the challenge is when we come out of this, the DSRO model doesn't change. We need to constantly be looking at what kind of defense do we need to play? How do we make sure we're always playing some defense? What are we doing to stabilize? Could we have more cash? Could we pay off more debt? What can we do to stabilize things? What resets do we need to anticipate and get prepared for or try out, even if they don't look profitable right now and they might fail, so that when changes happen, we're ready to play offense when everybody else is playing defense, and when everybody else is quitting even the game, and that's when you have huge opportunities.
Yeah, and Mike Maddock, who you may know Mike at IBM guys, and I've known Mike for a long time. And he has this amazing saying, and he says, "You can't read the label when you're inside the jar." And I think business leaders today, more than ever, are stuck in the jar. They're in the fog, right? So whether it's grabbing content from thought leaders like Dave Rendall, reading a book, getting around a peer group, joining a session, whatever it looks like, you got to get new ideas. And I think your presentation today was around the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And if we can help in any way, we're right up on time. If we can help in any way, generating those new ideas and helping companies play, defense, working through stabilization of an organization, as Dave said, we have to go do those things. If we can help you with resets, or we can help you with what does offense look like, we have programs for that. So send us an email at info@petracoach.com, and we'll get you what information that we possibly can to help you through this time. So Dave, thanks for being here with us, brother. Always good to see you.
Thank you.
Living in the pink. I love it. Thank you.
All right.